Today's guest, Rabbi Yaakov Shapiro, an international speaker, author, and rabbi for over 30 years. Well-known critic of Zionism.
What is a Jew?
Definition of a Jew is it's a religion, job description given by God. We are only a people, because of our faith, are obligated to fulfill these commandments. Zionist plan was to change the definition of a Jew to a nationality. They stripped Judaism of religious content, left the husk of whatever they could fit into their nationalism. Zionism is its own religion. Artificial Jewish flavoring started creating cultural centers and schools and brainwashing. Zionists had to convince the Jews that you are not what you think you are. A Jew is not a race. They are Jews of all races. A Jew is not an ethnicity. You can't convert to an ethnicity. And Jews are also not a nationality. The Jews had no flag. Difficult to believe that Ivanka Trump and Sammy Davis Jr., who converted to Judaism, are both of the same ethnicity.
I often confuse them.
Hello and welcome to episode 100 of the Palestine Pod, the weekly podcast where we break down the latest headlines dealing with Palestine from all over the world and bring you stories, commentary, and interviews with the aim of supporting the Palestinian struggle for decolonization, justice, and equal rights. I'm one of your hosts, Lara E. You might know me from Instagram as @GazanGirl, and I'm joined by my co-host, Mikey B.
What's up, y'all? Mikey B on TikTok, Michael Schertzer on Instagram, and you can call me Mikey Intifada if you claim to be the real Jews, but you run around killing and stealing all the time.
Before we get into today's episode, please like, comment, and subscribe if you hang out with us on YouTube. If you're listening on a podcast app, subscribe and leave a review. As always, you can find our full episodes and sources on PalestinePod.com. And if you want to get involved in the conversation, reach out to us at PalestinePod@gmail.com and give us a follow on Instagram @ThePalestinePod. So, Rabbi, I don't have a bio for you, but I just found one online. Is that going to be okay to read, or would you prefer to send me something that you already have? I just realized I prefer to ask.
It depends if I wrote the bio or the Zionists did.
Well,
Where'd you get it from?
Honestly,
ICMES?
sometimes they put together some nice stuff for us. Like they've got me a Canary Mission page that details all of the activism that I've done for Palestine. I forgot I did some of that. I was like, wow, that's pretty good.
Today's guest is Rabbi Yaakov Shapiro, an international speaker, author, and rabbi for over 30 years. Amongst his areas of research are religious philosophy, analytic theology, Talmud, and biblical exegesis. He's a well-known critic of Zionism, and his most recent work, The Empty Wagon, Zionism's Journey from Identity Crisis to Identity Theft, is a 1,381-page treatise on the differences between Judaism and Zionism. It is perhaps the most comprehensive work written on the subject. Rabbi Shapiro, welcome to the Palestine Pod.
Thank you very much for having me.
We're so honored to have you. Thank you so much for coming on the pod. I consider you like the LeBron James of Jews.
I consider LeBron James the rabbi of sports.
Hilarious response. This interview is going to be amazing. I say that because you're always dunking on Zionists, and it's just nice to see Jews dunk.
That's very good. The real truth is that the Zionists dunk on Jews. Rather than the Jews dunking on Zionists. Zionism itself was created as a substitute for Judaism, a replacement for Judaism, and a way to negate Judaism.
Yeah, so that takes us to our first question. What is a Jew?
Well, that's a very good question, and it's a question that Zionists are unable to answer because they negated the real definition. When I say the real definition, I mean the only intellectually consistent one. Let's first start with what a Jew is not. A Jew is not a race. They are Jews of all races. They are black Jews and white Jews, brown Jews. A Jew is not an ethnicity. There are Jews of all sorts of ethnicities. Makes no sense to say that the Ethiopian Jews and the Yemenite Jews are of the same ethnicity as the German and Russian Jews. It also makes no sense to say that you can convert to an ethnicity, even though you can convert to Judaism. It will be difficult to believe that Ivanka Trump and Sammy Davis Jr., who claims to have converted to Judaism, are both of the same ethnicity, right?
I don't know. I often confuse them.
A lot of people are confused when they talk about the Zionist definition of Judaism. So you have a lot of company there. there are real converts to Judaism. King David came from an ethnic Moabite family. Ruth converted to Judaism, and King David is her great-great-grandson. You can convert to an ethnicity. In addition, by Jewish law, if your father is not Jewish and your mother is Jewish, you are 100% Jewish. That doesn't follow the DNA rules of ethnicity. Ethnicity depends on your ancestry and your culture and things like that. But Judaism does not. There are actual, very precise rules and guidelines as to what constitutes a Jew and what does not. And this has been upheld for thousands of years. Jews are also not a nationality. Jews have had no national characteristics, meaning we've had no common land, language, or culture. For thousands of years, the Jews had no flag. Jews had no national anthem. Jews didn't even have a national symbol. The Star of David wasn't a national symbol of Jews. It's a Kabbalistic symbol. It represents certain concepts in Judaism, but it's not the symbol of our religion. I mean, it has no holiness in it. You're allowed to throw it on the floor or in the garbage or something like that. It's not considered a Jewish holy object or a Jewish holy symbol. The definition of a Jew is it's a religion, but there are non-religious Jews. That's true. And the reason for that is because every religion has its rules. And the rule of Judaism says that when God gave the Torah to Moses on Mount Sinai, whoever the Torah at that point required to fulfill the law of God, the 613 commandments, that by definition means you're a Jew. If you weren't obligated by that revelation to fulfill the 613 commandments, you're not a Jew, you're a Gentile. Gentiles are obligated to fulfill 7 commandments, Jews 613. Whoever is obligated to fulfill the 613 is considered a Jew, whether they believe that or not. Now, there are Jews in good standing, Jews in bad standing, there are traitorous Jews, there are treacherous Jews, but a Jew who is born, he is a Jew if he is obligated to fulfill the 613 commandments. So if you really want to be precise, being a Jew in the most accurate way to describe it is a job description given by God. God said you are deputized into this religion. You are obligated to fulfill these commandments, whether you do them or not. The obligation, the job description, defines you as a Jew. Now, there are all sorts of legal questions that we have regarding very precise, very, very precise laws as to what's considered a convert. You can convert into Judaism. You cannot convert out of Judaism. If a pregnant woman converts, her child is considered Jewish when it's born. It's a question. It's a disagreement amongst Jewish scholars whether the child is considered a convert, having converted together with the mother, or is it considered born Jewish because the mother converted before the baby was born. It's a question in our legal scholars. It's a disagreement. The difference is because if a child is converted when he's a minor, when he comes of age, he has the ability to renounce his conversion and say, I don't want to be Jewish. If you're born Jewish, you don't have that right. If a woman is converted while she's pregnant and she has a baby, when that baby becomes of age, bar mitzvah or bas mitzvah, is that baby now, who's an adult, allowed to renounce their Judaism? Is he considered born Jewish or converted? So these are questions.
Zionists would be like, they are Jewish if they can shoot a gun.
Well, you know what? That was actually Jabotinsky kind of sort of hinted at that. You know the quote? He says, as far as what we need to teach our children is how to shoot, Now, the Zionists didn't want this definition of Jew. The Zionists, I'll give you a quick history of how Zionism came into existence. They looked at Jews the same way the anti-Semites did. These were assimilated Jews, non-religious Jews, who looked at Jews as disgusting, immoral, weak, ugly, cowardly. And all the types of stereotypes that you find amongst the anti-Semites, you find in the original early Zionist writings. Their first solution was to assimilate. Theodor Herzl, who was one of these people who really didn't like Jews, he had an idea to convert all Jews to Christianity. He wrote about it in his diary. There was this fantasy he had where all the Jews are going to line up one Sunday afternoon, I believe it was Sunday, if I remember right, and go to church and be baptized and convert, except Herzl himself is going to be the last Jew. And then there won't be any more anti-Semitism. And not only that, but Jews will forget that they're Jews. They won't be Jews anymore. And they will live happily ever after. Anti-Semitism was attributed to the faults of the Jews, besides the anti-Semites' own inadequacies. They figured that if you change the Jews, the anti-Semites won't hate them anymore. So basically, the Zionist plan was to change to end anti-Semitism by changing Semitism as far as Jews are concerned, by eliminating that. The problem with the original plan, assimilation, is that it didn't work. In the late 1800s, there were pogroms, primarily in Russia, which showed the Zionists, or the assimilated Jews actually, that assimilated Jews are still Jews and they're still hated. But now that's where the identity crisis comes in. The subtitle of my book is Zionism's Journey from Identity Crisis to Identity Theft. The Zionists didn't understand this. They were thinking, why do people hate us if we're just like the Gentiles? We're just regular Russians. Why do they look at us as Jews? That's a very good question. I once asked an anti-Semite, a real famous, I don't want to say his name, real famous anti-Semite, how do you decide who's a Jew? He says, well, whoever identifies as a Jew is Jewish. Now,
was it Netanyahu?
Very good. No. Netanyahu would have had another answer, although I do consider him an anti-Semite. The Zionists had said to themselves, hey, we don't want to be Jews, but the Gentiles won't let us be Gentiles. So what are we? That was the identity crisis. And many scholars have used that phrase in various contexts. It was an identity crisis. So they came up with what I call identity theft. We're going to change the definition of Jew. Nationalism was just starting in those days. This was the 1800s. It was the Balkan people and others. Nation states started being formed in those days. And they said, hey, nationalism worked for so many people, let it work for the Jews as well. So we're going to change the definition of Jew to a nationality. Until the Zionists, nobody looked at the Jews as a nationality. There was maybe Spinoza was a quirky exception, which is one of the reasons he was excommunicated, because he just wanted to change the definition of Jew, but nobody really followed any of this stuff. There were early Zionists like Moses Hess and even Emma Lazarus, who wrote that poem on the Statue of Liberty. She was a Zionist too. There were pre-Herzlian Zionists who believed this, but it was just started in the 1800s. And that was the plan. So the plan was to change the definition of a Jew to a nationality. And the idea was that once the Jews change their definition, the way they look at themselves, the world will change the way they look at the Jews as well. The Jews will also, by changing the way they look at themselves, change their personalities, change their ideology, change the way they act, the way they behave, and change their aspirations and their values. Whereas previously, Jews were, as the Bible describes it, Mamleches Kaihanim v'Goy Kadosh, which means a people who are enjoined by God to fulfill this religion. Think Shaolin temples, that type of thing, except instead of a mountaintop, they were in ghettos. And the Jews themselves, about 1,000 years ago, were the ones that suggested they live in ghettos. They wanted to be separate, socially and culturally separate from the rest of society, loyal to the countries that they live, absolutely, but culturally and socially separate, because we have our own laws, we have our own lifestyle, and they were. There were assimilated Jews that didn't like that, and when they had a chance to break out of the ghetto, they did, thinking, as I mentioned, that assimilation is going to end anti-Semitism and they're going to be like everybody else. When they saw that didn't work, Then they tried nationalism. Nationalism is another name for Zionism, Jewish nationalism. That's all Zionism is. But the thing to know about Zionism is that whereas the Kurds, for example, look at themselves as a nationality and they're trying to find a state, right? The Jews never did. The Zionists had to convince the Jews that you are not what you think you are. You are not the Mamleches Kaihanim V'Goy Kodesh. You are not a people who are enjoined by God to fulfill this religion, these religious laws. You are a nation. You need a language. You need a flag. You need a country. Because Jews didn't share a language for 2,000 years. More than for thousands of years, we hadn't spoken Hebrew. In biblical times they did, but that wasn't the national language of the Jewish people, meaning that's not what united us into being a people. The only thing that united us into being a people is our Torah, our faith. It was so well known that this quote that we are only a people because of our faith, it's over 1,000 years old, and it was like the meme of Jewish identity. Even Theodor Herzl mentions it in his diary. Everybody knew that. The Zionists had to change that. And because Jews had no flag, they had no common language, culture, or land, the Zionists had to provide them with it. The Zionists set out to synthesize a new nationality. But instead of creating a new nationality out of nothing, Herzl stand and we'll call ourselves the
Canism that you refer to.
The Canaanim, yes.
Yeah.
So, yes, very good. There was this small group of kind of like Zionists called the Canaanim that decided to create a new nation. The Canaan is named after the people who were occupying, who were living in the Holy Land before Joshua came in there and conquered it. And they decided, okay, we're gonna make a new nationality. We're the Canaanim. It didn't never hit it off because why would anybody identify with that? So the Zionists, Theodor Herzl mostly had this brilliant idea. You know, if you want to if you want to change your identity, a witness protection program or something, you can get the government to give you a whole new identity, and that'll work. But there's a lot of resources and time and effort spent to create such. There's another way to do it that's easier. Kill somebody that's around your age, steal his papers, steal his birth certificate, steal his license, steal his identity, and you're him. That's what the Zionists did to the Jews collectively. We're going to erase Jewish identity. We're going to take their history, change it a bit. We're going to take their identity. We're going to take their self-image. We're going to take Jewishness, and we're going to make it into Zionism. We're going to get the Jews a flag. There was a Zionist flag before there was a state of Israel. We're going to get the Jews a language. There was a Zionist language. Modern Hebrew was created by the Zionists before there was a state of Israel because they wanted to supply the Jews with national characteristics, national symptoms, national equipment. And the hardest part was the country. They stole Jewish history. They revised all of Jewish history. They had this nonsense that Jews for thousands of years were looking for national self-determination, which is not true. We were looking for a messianic renewal of the world. Zionists will tell you, it's so funny how they do this. They'll tell you how Jews always for thousands of years would say at the end of the Passover Seder, next year in Jerusalem.
Yes, we hear this all the time.
Yeah, so let me tell you a secret that they're not telling you. Today, the Jews in Jerusalem also say that. So if you're sitting in Jerusalem, yes, and you have a Passover Seder, you end it by saying next year in Jerusalem. Now, the reason for that is that the Jerusalem that we are in context of our prayers praying for and hoping for and asking for is not a Jerusalem that we have today. It's a Jerusalem that's governed by a resurrected King David, resurrected from the dead, with God's revelation, the revelation of God's oneness and holiness revealed to the entire world, where the wolf lays down with the lamb. It's that Jerusalem that we're looking for, okay? Yes, the city is Jerusalem, but it's empty today. It's kind of like a husk of the real Jerusalem. It has a certain amount of holiness, certainly, but it's not King David's Jerusalem. The throne of David is not there. The Messiah is not there. That's what we were looking for. They emptied Judaism of religious content, left the husk of whatever they could fit into their nationalism, and then they redid history, redid ideology, and just started creating cultural centers and schools and an entirely new, it was a social engineering project. But one thing they were unable to steal, and that's the definition of a Jew. Considering what the definition of a Jew is, it depends on Torah law. Whoever the Torah says is obligated in the commandments is a Jew. So now, how are the Zionists going to define a Jew? You see, we have these precise laws. If your father's Jewish and your mother's not, you're not Jewish. If your mother's Jewish and your father is not, you are Jewish. If you convert, you're Jewish. And conversion means to accept these 613 commandments. And once you convert to Judaism, you cannot convert out of Judaism. So how are they going to define Jew? So they didn't really bother because they can't. It's like I wrote in my book, it's like trying to figure out what 2 + 2 is without recognizing the number 4. 4 doesn't exist. Now let's figure out 2 + 2. It was impossible. They couldn't do it. Jews aren't a race, although Jabotinsky said Jews are a race. It didn't make any sense. Jews are not a tribe. We have no head of a tribe. There's no infrastructure of a tribe. Who ever heard of this tribe? We actually consist of 12 tribes in biblical times, and now most people don't even know which tribes they come from, although it's mostly 2 of them. But we're not a tribe. We're not a nationality. We don't fit any of those things. Here's a question. If Jews are anything but a religion, can you have Christian Jews? Can a Jew practice Christianity? If a Jew is an ethnicity, so why can't he practice Christianity? Why can't we have Muslim Jews? Now, actually, the Zionists, the early Zionists, debated this and they were banging their heads against the wall, trying to figure out a solution to this dilemma. How are we going to define Jew? And there was a great disagreement between them whether or not you actually could have Muslim Jews and Christian Jews. Israel Zangwill said that when Jews get a state, so the Holy Sepulchre will be guarded by Jews that are Christians, and the Omar Mosque by Jews who are Muslims. Others said, no, we don't like that. But they never really answered the question until they couldn't kick the can down the road anymore. The problem is they wrote a law of return, which means that Jews have a right to come to Israel and become citizens. Okay, now it's a legal category, Jew. Now you have to legally define it. Are you going to follow the religious definition? Well, you're not a religious country. You're not following the religion. You don't. In fact, the Zionists, they refused even to mention the word God in their Declaration of Independence.
They probably knew he'd be pretty upset.
Yeah, absolutely. The Knesset got together and decided basically that, well, if you're born Jewish, you're Jewish. Well, according to whose definition? That still hasn't been exactly decided to this day. But if you're born Jewish, you're Jewish. They did have a chief rabbinate, and they kind of left the status quo that we're going to follow the religious definition. But if you practice another religion like Christianity, this is today's Israeli law, then you're not entitled to the law of return. Or if you're born a Jew and you're Jews for Jesus, or you practice Islam, you, let's say, converted to Islam, but you were born Jewish, you're not considered a Jew. But if you were born Jewish and you're an atheist, you are a Jew.
Zionists don't believe in God, but they believe that he gave them the land, sort of thing.
Yeah, there are people that say that, exactly. So now here's the problem. You see, without Judaism, what value is the Holy Land? The Holy Land is the Holy Land. That's what it is to us, a holy land. It's not a national homeland. The
Got
Torah
a lot
is
of
on,
nice beaches, I think, is the appeal.
being an Orthodox Jew, I would not know. But I can tell you it has a lot of holy sites. It's a wonderful place, and the borders of the Holy Land are not exactly the borders of Israel. The southern town Eilat is not part of our Holy Land, and southern Lebanon, somewhere south of Beirut, is the Holy Land.
The occupation is kind of confused about the concept of borders, right? They're not the best to ask about that.
They couldn't even decide whether they wanted the Holy Land or somewhere else. You know, they
Yes.
had the Uganda plan, they had other
Yes.
things. And Theodor Herzl, who was the masterminds behind Zionism, he said, no, listen, guys, we want the Holy Land because remember, this is like identity theft. He didn't use these words. I'm paraphrasing, of course. He said, for marketing purposes, we need to get the Jews to identify with our movement. So we're going to use Jewish symbols, phrases that are familiar, concepts that are precious, and we're just going to twist them a bit. Kind of.
Yeah. You know what's interesting that
Mhm.
on this specific topic, you refer to one of the Zionists in your book who actually recommended the land of Palestine over other lands for the reason that Jews could change their socioeconomic status there.
Mm-hmm.
You say, for example, Jews who immigrated to America tended to remain in the same types of jobs that they had in Europe. Jews in Russia were not involved in farming or agriculture, for example. If the Jews would collectively move to Palestine, they could develop it into a comprehensive social and economic community where Jews could normalize not only their lifestyles, but also their occupations. So there was this notion that it was also not only for religious reasons, but there was this idea that Palestine would make sense from an economic perspective.
It wasn't for religious reasons at all. They wanted the Jews to get together and start a new economy wherever it was. You know, Herzl wanted actually the Orthodox Jews. There was a small amount of Orthodox Jews, very misguided, who thought mistakenly that they could kind of exploit the Zionists, that the Zionists will help find a place where the Jews can go where there won't be any anti-Semitism. And as far as ideology and Jewish identity, the rabbis will take care of that. The Zionists presented themselves to many Jews as simply wanting a practical solution to anti-Semitism. That was propaganda. And the rabbis actually said, we don't need the Holy Land. Let's take Uganda, because Rabbi Reines was their leader. That was his name. He said, because if we're just looking for a safe place, why do we have to have the Holy Land? And Herzl, who was anti-religious, he didn't like religious Jews. He said, no, we need the Holy Lands because marketing purposes. We want the Jews to feel a sense of being Jewish, but not as a religion, as a nationality. We want them to have a sense of this is a familiar place, the place they've always longed for, but not as a messianic renewal of the world, as a national homeland. You see, artificial Jewish flavoring and artificial Jewish coloring, that's what they did. So it's like taking, I don't know, an apricot flavored Jelly Belly and trying to get nutrition from it and serving it to these people that eat apricots and say, look, we got this new apricot for you. It was bait. It was a generations and generations of, it was brainwashing. Now, different Zionists had different ideas. Ben-Gurion said the Jews don't have a definition. And Herzl, when they asked Herzl, it was a British committee, what Jewish nationalism is, he said, well, you know what a nation is? A nation is a recognizable, cohesive group of people held together by a common enemy. And they asked Herzl, who's the common enemy to the Jews? And he said, the anti-Semites, meaning, and he wrote in his book, The Jewish State, that we are forced to be a nation. Distress, meaning anti-Semitism, binds us together. According to Herzl, whoever the anti-Semites hate, they're Jewish. So remember I told you I asked an anti-Semite once, who do you hate? And he says, well, whoever identifies as a Jew. So now you go over to Herzl and you say, okay, no problem. Why do you identify as a Jew? He says, because these anti-Semites hate me.
Okay. So it's very circular.
I'm trying to get time off and nobody will approve it type of situation.
You don't even know who your employer is or what you're taking time off from. They don't even know what it is to be Jewish. They can't define it because there is and their plan was, and it still is. And I'll show you how even the last few years, even past 5 years since I wrote that book, they've been progressing along this trajectory of trying to make the Jews forget all of these questions that I'm asking and identify as Israeli nationals. I'm not Israeli. I'm not Palestinian. I'm an American who by religion practices Judaism. I have no more connection with it than my neighbor on this side who's Christian, my neighbor on that side who's actually Muslim. And I even those Jews that side with the Palestinians, right? They do so because they feel we're Jews and therefore we must speak about it. I say that whether those Jews are JVP or whether those Jews are Orthodox Jews that do this, or whether they're the left wing. So if they're doing it because they're Jews and they feel that as Jews they need to object to what Israel is doing, my question is, why do you feel that because you're Jewish, you must object to what Israel's doing any more than you feel you must object to what Ukraine is doing or Russia or China is doing? So you see, all of these groups, if somebody wants to say, you know what, I'm a human rights activist, I want to get involved in this particular issue, no problem. But if somebody says, I'm Jewish, and because I'm Jewish, I feel an obligation to object to what Israel does, I say that that person just enforced Zionism to an extent, whether he means to or not.
So you say to these Jewish people who feel that they need to get involved in speaking out on behalf of Israel's aggression against Palestinians, and you say why? And I would say, I'm sure many of them have told you that it's because of the identity theft aspect. They feel this need because these people are masquerading as Jewish people and telling all the world, we're the real Jews.
Zelensky is just bombing his own people. He's not like, we're doing this for Jews, right?
I agree with that sentiment. Absolutely.
So how do you respond to that?
Here's how I respond. If Japan would say they're the real Jews, okay? They're the real Jews. They represent all the Jews in the world, right? They have this ideology or something. No Jew would say, "Okay, we got to go protest on the side of Taiwan." If they're the Hebrew Israelites, they claim they're the real Jews. No Jews say, "Well, they're claiming they're us. We have to get involved." And if somebody steals your credit card and commits a crime with it, right? And he says, "I'm Lara, and I committed a crime with your credit card," and now you say it wasn't me, it's identity theft. You're not going to get involved in the question of whether the person really committed a crime, whether he's innocent or guilty. All you say is, "Give me back my credit card and leave me alone." It's the same thing over here. It's enough, more than enough, to say it's better to say, look, they're crazy, that they're no more Jewish than Japanese who would claim that they're the real Jews. It has nothing to do with me. If they really believed in their heart of hearts that it really was identity theft, they would say, these Israelis, they're crazy. It has nothing to do with me. They're not the Jews. Leave me alone with that. And I want to tell you, Michael and Lara, I really believe that if you really want to solve the problem, people ask, why are there those that oppose Israel's existence as opposed to the existence of, let's say, Russia? The reason why nobody opposes the existence of Russia is because Russia's existence is not the cause of the problem. Hitler was the biggest monster in the history of the world, but nobody's going to say, well, let's oppose the existence of Germany because the existence of Germany is not the problem. History is full of bad actors, bad leaders, and you don't have to negate the identity of their country to solve the problems that they cause. But here's the thing, Israel, in order for the problem in Israel to be solved, Israel has to change its identity. The problem is you cannot have a Jewish country, Jewish state, the way they define a Jewish state, and also be a democracy. And if they want to retain it as a Jewish state, that's the cause of the problem. So the problem is that Israel calls itself the Jewish state. Israel is different than all other countries in the world. All other countries in the world are the countries of their citizens, meaning nationality and citizenship is the same. Either it's the same immediately or eventually, meaning if you move to Italy and you become an Italian citizen, you serve in the Italian army, you imbibe Italian culture, eventually your family are going to be Italians. We in America, what's America? It's not even 300 years old. Well, everybody in America came from somewhere, right? Even France, Germany, they're more ancient, but you come to Germany, eventually you're German, right? You're German national, and you're a German national, German citizen. Israel is the only country in the world that claims that it is not the country of its citizens, it's the country of the Jews. This is the point that causes the problem. There is no country in the world that claims that it's the country of people who are not its citizens, never were its citizens, don't claim to be its citizens, don't plan on being its citizens. That means two things. Thing number one, if you live in Israel and you're not Jewish, although you may have civil rights to vote and things like that, Israel is not your country, meaning you do not have national self-determination rights in Israel. However, if you're somebody like me who lives outside of Israel, is not Israeli, I don't have a right to vote, I have no civil rights in Israel. Israel is my country. Netanyahu claims he's my prime minister. Israel claims to be my state. Israel is the only country like this, nowhere else. Jonathan Pollard, after he got out of jail and he moved to Israel, he said regarding dual loyalty that all Jews, yes, he would advise Americans to spy on America for Israel because Jews are loyal to Israel. You see, this is what they want. They want that Jews should identify as Israelis, but Israel's the only such country, and that's the cause of the problem. You know this nonsense about anti-Zionism being anti-Semitism that they say?
We've never heard that before. Could you expand on that?
Yeah, I will expand on that. There are oodles and oodles of different reasons and justifications that various Zionists give for that. But the reason why they concocted this thing, Benjamin Netanyahu writes this in his book. Okay, and Israel has it on its website in an article by Avigdor Lieberman. And Danny Ayalon wrote about it too. He's mentioned it in an interview also. It's an equation. What France is to the French and Japan is to the Japanese, Israel is to the, finish that formula. Israel is to the
Jews.
Israelis.
Weapons manufacturers.
If Israel if Israel would not have Zionism, France is to the French, what Japan is to the Japanese, what Israel is to the Israelis. But says these Zionists, no, that's not the case. Japan is to the Japanese, what France is to the French, what Israel is to the Jews. And here's the second half of the formula. And just as you cannot be against the existence of French and say, I still want the French people to exist, and you cannot be against the existence of Japan and still say, I want the Japanese people to exist, you cannot say, by the same token, I am against the existence of Israel and I want the Jewish people to exist. You see, it's all this identity theft. It's a new thing, about 20 years old maybe, identity Zionism. Google it. Identity Zionism.
We don't need to Google it. We interact with people who live it all the time.
Oh,
like
yes.
A personality trait. Yeah.
There's something to it. Something more to it. I have in front of me an article by Stephen Boehm, one of the big influential Zionists, in a journal called Jewish Political Studies Review, spring 2008. Okay. It's called American Jewry and the State of Israel, How Intense the Bonds of Peoplehood. Okay. Now, we know that this really is the crux of Zionism, how intense the bonds of peoplehood. There is no bond of peoplehood between the state of Israel and American Jewry. But here's what he says, okay? Lastly, Jews and Americans alike need to understand the centrality of Israel to the identification of Jews as Jews. Palestinians, they tell me, like, just give me my lands back. I don't care what a Jew is or what's going on. Just give me my lands back. That's all I want.
Which is fair, right?
That's a super fair critique from Palestinians, I feel.
That's that's fully fair. And I'm not
Yeah.
faulting them for that, but I'm saying that it would enhance their argument, their case, if they would be able to counter Zionism. You see, there's two things going on over here. There's Israel is a country. The Israelis are a people. And then there's the Palestinians. They're a people and they're a country. But there's another thing over here that's the problem. It's an ideology. It's called Zionism. That ideology needs to be attacked and negated. And by looking at this, like the Hatfields and the McCoys, or like the Chinese and the Uyghur Muslims, or like any other problem, you're not going to find real solutions. You want to know what my solution is? My solution is negate Zionism instead of all the energy and resources being put into discussing one-state solution, two-state solution. Those discussions go nowhere. That if the amount of discussion and time and effort and brain power that is being put into this ideas about one-state, two-state, we need to sever the connection between Israel and Jews. And that connection in English is called, that glue, that connection is called Zionism.
Can you talk about how Zionism is actually Christian and it was prophetized by Christians to Jews for the longest time, to like a very tepid reaction for like hundreds of years? And you could not find a Jewish Zionist for the longest time.
They say you can't be a Jew without being a Zionist. That's what they say.
Yeah. How did that change?
That's identity Zionism. You see, the Christians, we call them evangelicals today in America. We know that there are millions of these evangelicals. And they believe that the Jews are going to return to the Holy Land, and that's going to pave the way for the coming of their Messiah again. And there are different opinions amongst the Christians. The Jews will either be killed, they'll convert, or some other option. Those are the two main lines, killed or converted. So
that sounds like Herzl's plan, huh? Come on.
well, actually, a Reverend William Hechler approached Herzl after he saw Herzl's book in 1890. I think he had a prophecy, or he had some kind of permutations of biblical words that said 1896 the Christian Messiah is going to come, and that was approximately when Herzl wrote his book. And he came to Herzl that he's a fulfillment of the prophecy, and he was a very well connected with royalty and heads of state, and he helped Herzl get connected. The Christians, the late 1500s, early 1600s, there was this Christian movement. Only Protestants, not the Catholics, they're not involved in this. Which is why America and UK are much more have much more Christian Zionists, and not France and Italy or Greece, right? Because it's not a Catholic thing; it's a Protestant thing. Anyway, so they had this idea. The Jews, of course, rejected it because we have a different Messiah than they do, a different religion than they do. The Jews also rejected Zionism because we have a different religion than they do. We do have a Messiah and they don't. Zionists figured, guys like Herzl, they're going to use the Christian Zionists to get a state. They're going to join forces with them for a common cause. Let's get the Jews a state. And they did. They worked hard at it together. Lord Balfour was one of them, and Balfour Declaration. Meantime, Zionists were also using the religious Jews, telling them your religious aspiration to live in the Holy Land, at least, to live in the Holy Land. Next year in Jerusalem, they're trying to change their mindset, without telling them that this is from the Christians, And so they're using the Christians, they're using the Jews, the religious Jews, actually, the religious Jewish Zionists said, let's use the Zionists. These religious Jews made a terrible, horrible mistake then. But they said, let's use the Zionists to get us a place free of anti-Semitism. And we're not going to allow them to give us any ideology or religion. We believe they just want Jews shouldn't be killed. There shouldn't be any more pogroms. Let's find a place. Everybody was using everybody else. And now we have the mess that we have today, where they can't even define what a Jew is.
I ask you about scripture, Jewish scripture. A lot of the times Zionists will try to bring that into the conversation and say, no, there's a basis for us going back to this land and ruling this land, and it comes from our religion. The old, this book tells me to be here and to come here and live here and rule over this land. And then when you hear from some religious Jews, they will tell you that in fact it's actually the opposite. I'd like to know what your position is on what the scripture actually says a Jewish person's connection or relationship has to be with that land.
First, it should not surprise you that there are these differences of interpretation, because Christians will tell you that in the Bible it proves that Jesus is the Messiah. And there are verses in it saying, Muslims will tell me, I've been told by Muslims, that my own scriptures predict the Prophet Muhammad is coming. And Zionism is its own religion, okay? So they also have their scriptural proofs. It's okay. That doesn't say anything derogatory about the scriptures themselves. There are doctors who are anti-vaxxers that'll show you from biology that vaccinations are bad. Everybody claims to have proofs. That nobody says that they got a vision from God. Actually, there are those that say they got prophecy straight from God, but it shouldn't surprise you in any case that there are these differences of interpretation. According to Judaism, the land is holy. It was the same Jerusalem and the same Holy Land when the Romans had it, when the Mamluks had it, when the British had it. The only thing that will affect its holiness is the behavior of people in the land. If people behave in a godlike manner, the land itself becomes holier. If people behave against God, then the land itself becomes less holy. It's a spiritually sensitive land. And Jews were there when we had King David, when we had prophets, when we had a much higher level of fulfillment of Judaism than we do today. And then came the idol worshippers, and God said, as it says in the Bible, if you worship idols, God is going to kick you out of the land. And in fact, Jews say that passage 3 times a day in our prayers. And God did that. And we went back once and we got kicked out again. It was because of our sins. Yes, the Romans were the rod of God's wrath at the 2,000 years ago, but this is our belief. My argument isn't with somebody that says, okay, we don't believe that. So, but my answer to him, you don't believe that, then why do you need what is the Holy Land anyway? Then what's a Jew?
What if the people there set up an apartheid state and spray it down with skunk water? Would you say that is acting in God's light?
Anything that's against the Jewish religion, anything, stealing, killing, breaking the Sabbath, eating non-kosher food. Benjamin Netanyahu is a classic example of a complete somebody who the land vomits out, as the scripture says. And the land, when a guy like Netanyahu or the Zionists are in the land, the Holy Land screams in agony. We can't hear it because we don't have spiritual enough ears. The land screams in agony every moment that these people are violating Jewish law.
That's wild. I was just looking for maybe a yes or a no, but that is probably a better answer.
This is Judaism. Judaism is much deeper and much more profound and involved than most of the people who are busy with the debate about Zionism will tell you, because for the most part, it's a political debate. Palestinians have a right, historical right, all these kind of things. The land screams in agony. When the Muslims were there in Jerusalem, it used to be that, yes, look, there was a golden age of Jews in Muslim lands. There were certain times and places where it was better for Jews, certain times that it was less good. But I know people that say they remembered when I was in high school, the dean of my school said that 25 years ago, okay, you could meet people who lived in Jerusalem, and the women never went to synagogue because they were taking care of their family, which according to Judaism is a very religious and holy function, more so than going to the synagogue. Children are God's most valuable, Judaism's most valuable possession, and taking care of that, except one day on Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year, even though who babysat the children? Muslim women in Jerusalem. They babysat the Jew, and these Muslim women, look, we're talking about God, we're talking about religion. I know that the Zionists say we're not a religious country. Fine, no problem. I'm a religious man. Without religion, there is no definition of Jew. And you asked me from the Jewish religious perspective, Muslim woman that dress in a modest manner, okay, the way they did. We're talking about religious Muslim woman, okay, a religious Muslim man that fulfills from a Jewish perspective, the 7 commandments that non-Jews have to fulfill. You can't steal, you can't kill, you don't practice idol worship, and Muslims don't. Whether you hold like Ibn Rushd or Al-Ghazali, it doesn't matter. I know about these Muslim philosophers only from Jewish medieval writings. That's where I know it from. I never studied Islam, but Maimonides and Rabbi Chizdoi Kreshkash and other Jewish philosophers discuss the Muslim writings. And if they don't practice idolatry and they don't kill and they don't steal and they set up a system of law, it doesn't have to be Jewish law, a relatively fair system of law, however they want, a civil law. You're not allowed to eat limbs off live animals. That's one of the rules. That's just the way it is. If you fulfill the 7 commandments, you're closer to God than Theodore Herzl ever was. I'm telling you as a rabbi, a law-abiding average Muslim that doesn't worship idols, doesn't kill, doesn't steal, and fulfills the 7 commandments is closer to God than a heretic, anti-God, anti-Jewish guy like Theodore Herzl. Judaism is a meritocracy. If somebody wants, they can convert to Judaism. The only difference between me and somebody who's not Jewish in terms of, being chosen is that I have no choice. I was born Jewish. They could choose if they want. It's no problem. King David, again, in the Bible, Ruth was a Moabite. She converted. Her descendant is King David. There's no problem with converts. Convert if you want. It's not a race. It's not a ethnicity. It's a relationship with God. It's a being deputized into God's work. That's all being Jewish is. And the Holy Land is spiritual, just like people have a soul. People have a soul besides a body. Places have souls too. And the soul of the Holy Land is higher, holier than the soul of the other places all over the earth. It's the best place, most conducive to connecting to God. Just like there are times of year that are holier than others, there are places that are holier. I'm certain in Islam, this is not a strange idea.
No, and in fact, that was one of the most refreshing parts of reading the book, was getting to know more about the Jewish conception of God and the notion, I wrote it down in my notes here. You refer to God as Hashem, all-powerful, infinite and boundless creator of the universe, who is perfect and needs nothing. That is perfectly, exactly consistent with Islamic theology and creed and belief. So
the necessary existence, it is really the first cause.
Interesting and heartwarming to be aware of that as well as a Muslim.
We could do the work that God revealed to us would be beneficial for us and to the world and to the universe and to our souls and to everybody. If anywhere, wherever we live, and God sends us wherever he wants to be, to go create a war. And as you surely know, even before 1948, there was 6 months of a civil war that took place there. The Arab countries, the neighboring Arab countries could not invade then because it was under the auspices of England, and you'd be starting up with the UK. And as soon as the mandate ended, then there was the war. But to make a war and have people die for land is just the most ridiculous thing according to Judaism. If there was a prophet and God said, you know what, this is theology. When God tells Joshua, go conquer the Holy Lands, what that means is God decided it's time for every individual, to die sooner or later. This is their time. This is fate. This is the world. This is what happens. We're not cutting short anybody's life. It's nature, God. It's all run by the same force. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. But for people to get up and pick up guns, and even the 1967 war, there are Jews that say it was worth it because we got the wall. The wall is holy. Yes, fine. But human beings are much more holy than a wall. If they sacrificed men, women, and children, their own people even, for a wall. What are you, crazy? According to Jewish law, except for 3 capital sins, we commit the sin rather than put somebody's life in danger. And if there's a 1% chance that somebody's life is in danger, he will eat on Yom Kippur. He will break the Sabbath because it's a commandment by God to save life. That life is holy. The entire Zionist ideology from beginning to end is so antithetical to Judaism. And this is why the Zionists made Zionism, because they knew that Jews didn't like wars. We would rather run than fight. General Patton said, you don't want to die for your country. You want the other guy to die for his country. Jews don't want anybody to die. If there's somebody's chasing us, we'll run. Does that make me a coward? No, it doesn't. I'm sorry. In martial arts, that's the first thing they teach you. Avoid a fight. That's what we did. We didn't have warriors. We don't have holy cities or sites named after places of war, like the Alamo, for example. The Bible is full of wars all over the place, right? But the sites of the wars are not significant to us. They're not important to us. We don't name our children after warriors. We never aspired to be warriors. This made the Zionists sick. I once spoke to a Christian minister, and I mentioned this to him. He was talking about the wars and King David, and I said, King David wrote the Psalms. Nowhere in King David's Psalms will you hear the type of talk that you would hear from other kings. I'm going to kill my enemies. I'm going to be the strongest guy. Never. He talks about God, save me from my enemies. God, you do this for me. And then he says, one thing I ask of God, it's only this that I'm going to ask. Shivti b'veis Hashem kol yimei chayai. I want to sit in the house of the Lord all my life. Lachzois b'noyam Hashem, to bask in the splendor of God, ulavakar b'heicholoi, and to consistently visit God's domain. That's all we wanted to do, and that drove the Zionists crazy. Where's the Jewish art? Where's the Jewish architecture? Where's the Jewish sports? Where's the Jewish strongmen? And most of all, where are the Jewish warriors? Our attitude was, go do it, become them if that's what you want. But they did not succeed because of the pogroms. So they said, we're going to change all of you, all of us. We're going to steal your identity. We're going to tell the world, our wars are your wars. Our country is your country. We are the state of the Jews. Our wars are the wars of the Jews. We're fighting for you. Our prime minister is the prime minister of the Jews. And that is why Zionism is so antithetical, so the opposite of Judaism. And
the notion about Jews never having military heroes, you wrote about that in your book, and it really touched me. You said they never had military heroes. We only looked up to righteous people, never to the warrior, the athlete, or the artist. It would be unthinkable for the Jews to have the scene of a military battle become a national attraction. Meanwhile, compare that to what Israel is.
Oh my God.
Everybody has to serve in the military. Everyone.
That's right.
It's a state of soldiers.
And that's why Ben-Gurion called the military the melting pot. This is precisely why they insist on drafting all ultra-Orthodox Jews. And now you know why we refuse to go. They will refuse to serve their country. Oh no. The purpose of Israel's army is not merely to be a military. The purpose of Israel's army is to be a melting pot. It's a church of Zionism. You know that they teach about Judaism and Jewish identity in the army? It's ridiculous. The army is their church of Zionism. And by the way, if you ever argue with any Zionists, this idea that Zionism is the only country in the world that doesn't represent its citizens, they have no answer.
Can you talk about how the entire Zionist story is synthetic, how they themselves changed their names and tried to assimilate to a more Middle Eastern style culture?
Yeah, so entire Zionist history, culture, Jewish identity is all contrived. It's synthetic, it's artificial. People sat down, and they still do today. There are think tanks, JPPI and various others like that. And I think, how could we further advance Zionism? How could we change the story? How could we better the story? How could we progress? How could we get more followers? And one of the things they did was They wanted to make Jews appear as if they are organically connected to the Holy Land, but not from a religious perspective, not from a spiritual perspective, not from a God-centric perspective, rather from a national perspective. So many of them came from Russia, from Poland, and they spoke Yiddish, most of them. The Sephardim spoke Arabic, actually. I have Jews or friends from Syria, they speak Arabic. So they started by changing the language that they wanted the Jews to speak to Hebrew. No more Yiddish. Yiddish is a dialect of German.
Even the modern invention of Hebrew is not the same as the ancient language of Hebrew, right? It's a reconstruct.
More than a reconstruct, it's blasphemous. You mentioned the language. In the Talmud, when there are discussions between rabbis and the discussion is not concluded, the question remains unanswered. So there's a phrase, it's called teiku. Teiku. In English, you'd spell, I guess, T-A-I-K-U, okay? Teiku. And it's used exclusively as a words to say this rabbinic, legal, religious discussion has not been resolved. Today, they changed the meaning of that word. They use it to describe a tie in a soccer match. Do you understand what they're trying to do over here? There's a word we speak about when we mention God, and 99.9% of the time, it's only used in regarding God. It's called kaviochel. The word kaviochel means as if. In the Talmud, there are sections that discuss not technical legal Jewish law, but morals and religion and theology. It's called Agoda. In modern Hebrew, that word means a fairy tale. You see what they did? They did this. They changed the Hebrew accent to make it more Middle Eastern, to drive a wedge between fathers and children. Now imagine this: you have a father, a guy who looks like me, or a grandfather, a European guy in Hungary or Poland or Russia, and he has a son or a grandson who's a Zionist, and he uses the word God kaviochel, and to this kid it means as if. Kid starts laughing, right? Or he discusses a serious rabbinic discussion, and he says, well, the teiku, and that means a soccer score, a soccer tie. It's made to mock Judaism and to mock Jews. So they changed their names. They had regular European, Russian names, Milakovsky and Grun. Ben Gurion was Grun or Green, depends how you pronounce, the U with two dots on top of it. All of these guys, these names aren't really natural, organic names of their families. They changed it. And Ben Gurion made a rule that over a certain level of employment or in the army, an officer or employee, you have to change your name. Everything, the whole history is a fake. Their identity is a fake, and it's my identity that they stole. This is it, Zionism is anti-Semitic. Zionism is anti-Jewish. And the solution, we have to get rid of Zionism.
I definitely agree with that they're leaning more into espousing alleged religious imagery and ideology. We see images and videos coming out of Palestine of settlers literally kicking Palestinians out of their homes. They're dressed in some sort of Jewish appearing clothing. They present as being very religious Jews.
The settlers are like in the olden days, in the days of the Bible, where you had religious Jews who worship the Baal idol. Settlers have many behaviors of Orthodox Jews, but they're also idol worshippers. They got their ideology like for pagan idol worship and German vitalism. And this is where Rabbi Kook got his stuff from. Nationalism, and it's a whole big mix of all sorts of pagan, non-Jewish, nationalist philosophies. And all they did was put a yarmulke on all of it and grow their long payas and say, okay, now we have a new type of Judaism. Absolutely disavow them. They are idol worshippers, pagan land worshippers who are also Orthodox. They just mixed both together.
Without realizing it, they became Christian Jews, fulfilling the Christian philosophy of Zionism.
Yeah, by the way, the evangelicals support them. And they have buildings and structures with evangelical names of evangelicals on the buildings as the donors.
Yeah, totally. All right, Rabbi, I think that's a good place for us to wrap up. Thank you so much for joining us here today on the Palestine Pod. We have been such big fans of your work, and I just want to say personally, thank you so much for providing the documentation that allowed me to open my eyes to reality.
Thank you. I really appreciate you having me on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. Shabbat Shalom.
Bye-bye,
Great to
guys.
see you.
Shabbat Shalom.
Folks, that has been another episode of the Palestine Pod. Thank you all so much for listening. Check out our full episodes and sources, www.palestinepod.com. Follow us on Instagram at The Palestine Pod. Send us an email at palestinepod@gmail.com, and look for us on Patreon, www.patreon.com/PalestinePod. That's been another episode of the Palestine Pod. Thank you all so much for listening. Have a great day. Rabbi.
Testing 1, 2, 3. How we doing?
We can hear you great. We can see you well. You've got a very professional setup, sir. Good to see you.
Hey, good to see you, Michael and Lara. And I have
it looks like you have a morning radio show, honestly.
Hey, that's what it looks like. Yeah, that's what this equipment is made for. And I have something called Rodecaster Pro over here.
Oh, wow. That's very professional. Yeah,
I have that mixer. So, I'm hooked up here. May as well use it.
You have like Dr. Dre's setup. That's crazy. Yeah.
That's right. Actually, Michael Jackson used this mic to record Thriller.
Hold up, that exact mic or like type of mic?
This brand and
okay.
This mic.
I was like, dog, where did you get Michael Jackson's mic from? Like we're gonna have to start the podcast asking a few questions about that, I think.
Yeah. No, Shure advertises that. When they advertise this SM7B, that's what they say. They say this mic was used by Michael Jackson. Well, not this very one, but this Shure SM7B, So how we doing, guys?
We're doing so well. How are you, sir?
I'm good.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom to you too.
So we are so lucky and privileged and honored to have you with us today. I actually have to get your book rebound because the pages have started to come out of the binding.
Oh boy.
Okay, humble brag about how much she's read the book. Wow.
No, I'm serious. It's a stack of pages now.
We haven't even started the interview.
Lara, email me
your address.
Lara, email me your address and I'll send you a replacement on the house. In fact, the latest print, which came from China, long story, they actually censored the book. They because I wrote the words Tibet in there and Taiwan, and their scanners found it and they censored it. Our binding is better quality now. It's a stitch binding, the old style, although the print was photo offset as opposed to the one you have, which is inkjet. Yours has better print, but the binding's better on this one. I'll send you a replacement.
Oh, that would be amazing.
On the house, gratis. And Michael, you send me your address in LA, I'll send you one too. How's that?
Oh. That's very kind. I was going to say, because I actually destroyed the binding on mine too, and it's an ebook.
Really? I can tell you're a comedian. That was good.
Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, okay. I'm having so much fun already.